And so to conclude our journey through the Scrum framework, this particular journey, where we are looking at specific practical things that we can do and we can use, let's conclude by looking at the Scrum team or an Agile team, what it means to be a part of one, how they should behave, and some key points that, some key nuances that may help. Let's start then with the Scrum guide itself and the definition within there. So within a Scrum team, there are no sub-teams or hierarchies. It is a cohesive unit of professionals focused on one objective at a time, the product goal. So just in that sentence there's a lot to unpack, a lot to think about, and a lot to start practicing. And this is why we go through the Scrum guide slowly in stages, taking each sentence at a time, and working out what that practically means for us. So important to do that. Scrum teams are cross-functional, meaning the members have all the skills necessary to create value each sprint. They are also self-managing, meaning they internally decide who does what, when, and how. Again, a lot to unpack there, and that can feel a bit different, and it can feel a bit scary when we look at this. But one of the things we know for sure is that as teams start working in this way, and they're supported by management, by leadership, then just incredible results happen, and they happen very, very quickly. You probably have picked that up from some of the previous videos in this pathway. Let's carry on with the Scrum guide then. The Scrum team is small enough to remain nimble and large enough to complete significant work within a sprint. In general, we have found that smaller teams communicate better and are more productive. What do we mean by small? The previous versions of the Scrum guide and previous knowledge, previous ideas would talk about somewhere around 7 people plus or minus 3, maybe 6 plus or minus 3, so somewhere around there. And we'll look at that in a little bit. And finally, the entire Scrum team is accountable for creating a valuable, useful increment every sprint. Again, it's this idea that it's not a single individual who is responsible. We are collectively responsible. When a rugby team is on the field and it is competing, it's everybody's responsibility to get that ball over the try line. One of the questions that we often get is, where does the project manager sit in all of this? So we know that the roles in Scrum are a product owner, a Scrum master, and the team. What about the project manager? There's a lot of material out there that you can read which explains that the role of the project manager is actually split between the product owner, the team, and the Scrum Master. So all of the work that they tend to do is shared between them. And again, if you go back to the Scrum Guide, and it talks about the fact that we are collectively responsible for the outcomes, that helps us to understand that. There are some teams which do have a project manager with that title, but hopefully they are an agile project manager if they are involved. Some teams there tends to be there is a tendency for the project manager to possibly become a Scrum Master. Generally, they tend to move towards that, but I see no reason why they couldn't become product owners as well. But anyway, we'll have a look at that at a later date. So as well as working together and collaborating together, a Scrum team needs to be able to work collaboratively and closely with users, with stakeholders, with vendors, and of course with the delivery team, the UX team, the architecture, program managers, and so on. Again, very important that we are nimble, collaborative, and networked in that way. So what do we mean when we talk about this idea of cross-functional? So typically, people, humans in organizations seem to be clustered together. So we will have all of the finance people working together, all the architects working together in a division, in a unit or whatever, and so on. And what we're trying to do with Agile is we're trying to say, put all those skills together into one team, so that the team doesn't have to go anywhere else for information. Often that is it's mostly often easy to do, but it just does take a little bit of a change of the way we do that. And we'll look more at that in a second when we explain why we do this. Remember, we talked about the idea of this team is small, somewhere around 8 or 9 people. And there's a great section in the book, The Age of Agile by Steve Denning. He talks about the law of the small team. And what we explain there is that if you have 7 people in a team, there are 21 connections. You just add 2 people to that, but you increase significantly the number of connections. So now 9 people, there are 36 connections, and so on. You go to 12 people, and there are 66 connections. It just makes communicating more complicated the bigger we are. So the idea of the small team is quite important. But we also need to work with other teams. So how do we handle that? This idea that we have a number of other parts of the organization that we need to work with. And that's okay, because what Steve Denning talks about in another chapter is the law of the network. And that is where the teams learn to work together with other teams. And we will see this where teams will work as a team, they may work as a squad, and then they may work across the teams in sometimes in guilds or communities of practice. We often hear that. And the idea is that for example, the product owners, they all get together and meet once a week and discuss whatever they need to discuss. You get the Scrum Masters all meeting once a week. You get individuals within the team meeting once a week. What then happens is if the team is meeting on a daily basis, the team itself is meeting on a daily basis at the daily Scrum, and the individuals in the teams are meeting with their colleagues, with their peers, throughout the week, then the whole team, no team is more than 24 hours away from some new information, a new piece of knowledge or something that may have happened, and that really helps us keep the teams together well. So then, just to conclude, the teams should be small, cross-functional, self-organizing, autonomous, we've seen that there, collaborative, and of course networked. And if we ponder on those elements and we work to create that, we then have teams which can really deliver. It won't happen immediately. It may take 2 or 3 sprints to really get going, but with a good coach in place, a good product owner, a good Scrum Master, you are able to create that very well and experiment. Find out what works for you, what works for your team.